Welcome to Washington in Focus Daily. It is Tuesday, August 4th, 2026. I'm Carlene Johnson, the Center Square, Washington state government reporter. And in today's episode, an arrest in the Spokane fires. A man accused of arson, captured on video, allegedly starting one of the fires, the most destructive fires that may have, in fact, led to the other two fires, that complex destroying some 700 homes and other buildings on Saturday. And we still have zero containment on any of those fires. And then a law firm out of California that is now set up in Spokane is already talking about assigning blame potentially to utilities and encouraging fire victims to get in contact with them. Now, there's no evidence at this point that the utilities of Vista or other utility operators in the greater Spokane area have any responsibility for the fires for certain. But former Governor Jay Inslee is tied to this law firm. So there are some interesting connections to reveal in today's episodes. You'll hear from one of the attorneys from that firm, as well as GOP Chair Jim Walsh, who calls Inslee, I'm quoting, a shady ambulance chasing scumbag for his connection to the firm and their goals. And then, of course, it is August 4, primary election day in Washington. But where are the voters? Did you get your ballot filled out? Turnout is coming in extremely slow, but maybe everybody just waited until this week. Some insight on that and why this election is more important than many voters have paid attention to. So let's dive into today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily. There is now a suspect in custody on suspicion of arson in the start of the Old Trails fire in Spokane on Saturday. Now, authorities had previously detained him that very day because he was reported by people who saw him allegedly starting this fire. They questioned him, released him, and then again nabbed him yesterday. And now he's behind bars, accused of arson. And of course, in fact, if he could be tied to any of these other, fires, there'll be additional charges. And that'll be all played out in the days to come. But in the Monday night press conference, we learned a lot more about this guy from Spokane County Sheriff John Knowles, who said his detectives arrested the 37-year-old. And turns out this guy was previously convicted of manslaughter in Arizona and now is held on $1 million bond. So here's part of that Monday evening press conference.
About 5 p.m. this afternoon, we executed an arrest warrant and search warrant in the city of Spokane, and we took 37-year-old Aaron Farnacci, a convicted felon, into custody on a single charge of arson in the first degree. About 3 o'clock this afternoon, an arrest warrant affidavit and a search warrant affidavit were presented to Judge Zamblin. She signed the arrest warrant and set a $1 million bond on Mr. Farnacci. Mr. Farnacci is currently in custody and being interviewed by detectives from our major crimes unit here in the Spokane County Sheriff's Office.
Nearly 1,000 personnel are still fighting these fires in the Spokane area. Zero containment as of the time of this recording. 67,000 people forced to evacuate. The majority of those people are still not allowed back into their homes. Estimates from local officials on Monday morning said that, or Monday evening rather, said that thousands of those people may not get to go back for quite some time. There's dangers there. They're watching out for looters. They're asking people not to fly drones over the fire ravaged areas. But again, 700 structures roughly, and the majority of those are homes that have been destroyed in these fires. This is good news, though. As of today, all 14 of the people that were unaccounted for as of Monday have been found. So these were among the roughly 300 people that called for help on Saturday when everything was frantic and those level 3 evacuation notices went out. There were 14 people that as of Monday, they had not been able to close the loop on and ensure that those people were safe and sound. They've now done that. So at this point, there was zero loss of life, and I have not even heard of any reports of injuries from folks evacuated. I would guess that among the nearly 1,000 firefighting personnel, there could well be folks that have been injured on the firefighting line. But this is incredible that no loss of life and no serious injuries to citizens in this massive evacuation effort that happened on Saturday. And I did also chat today with Representative Jenny Graham of Spokane. She lost her home. She and her husband lost their home in the fires on Saturday. I caught up with her today. She is in Idaho staying with her daughter in law, and spent the first night, I guess, or night or two in a hotel with her mom. So, there are, doesn't matter who you are when fire comes and everything is destroyed. This is the result. One thing that she shared of note, and I intend to follow up on this in the next few days, is that state lawmakers, because today's election day, we're in election season, they're not able to contact constituents and say, "How are you? Can I help? What can I do? Here are resources and connections that I have." And she said that was breaking her heart. Only because I reached out to her was she able to respond and say, "I can talk to you off the record and tell you here's the situation." She is trying right now in earnest to get some sort of accommodations or sort of suspension of these election rules so that even though we're in an election season and she's not seeking reelection, but the rules still apply to her, that they can contact constituents and be of some help to the people that they care about in their district. So that is a story I intend to follow up on in the days to come this week. Now, a law firm out of California that recently set up in Spokane is already talking about trying to find out who to assign blame to. The utilities, did they cut power off in time? Should they have? Would that have helped at all? And they're encouraging fire victims, those who've lost their homes, businesses, to get in contact with them. Now, this is Singleton Schreiber. That's the name of the law firm. Now, former Governor Jay Inslee is now tied to this firm. He was hired on with them to do some advocacy work. So there are important connections here that deserve at least the light of day. So um, Singleton Schreiber put out this email blast to media, and I got the email yesterday on Monday saying, "Hey, make sure that you let your viewers, your readers know that we're here, and they should be in contact with us if they need any help." They want to position themselves to potentially represent Spokane fire victims, and they offered up their attorneys for an interview. At this point, obviously, we've got an arsonist. We have no idea if there's going to be other blame assigned, folks that should be held accountable for these fires. But of course, you get the law firms that line up hoping that they can be in the middle of representing victims. So I spoke to Rich Barker with Singleton Schreiber in an interview on Monday, and I asked him, I said, "Okay, so who really pays for these big settlements?" Because in California, which is where they're headquartered, utility ratepayers saw their bills go way up when they created this fire victims liability fund backed by this law firm who wanted that. Now, this was tried here in Washington state this legislative session, a bill that was backed by Democratic Representative Christine Reeves of Federal Way. It didn't get past its initial hearing in a committee, but it would have established this victims fund. The law firm then gets to tap into the fund for these payouts. So again, I asked Singleton Schreiber attorney Rich Barker about that.
Nobody wants their rates to go up, and we completely understand that. And it's really a question of whether corporate profits, or whether the corporations and the utilities are going to ensure that they keep rates low, while at the same time ensuring that they have coverage to pay for the catastrophic event that in some instances they caused, right? And making sure that they are taking responsibility for the things that happen to our communities, for the devastating impacts of wildfires in our communities. we think that it's important that we put the customers and those who are victims and survivors of wildfires head over profits. And it's essential that having a fund in place like this, especially for utilities like Inland Power and Light or other smaller utilities that don't have large insurance policies, that they're able to obtain this insurance on the back end. I mean, ultimately, the state pays for it when there is a massive wildfire like this, the suppression cost and other costs associated with rebuilding from a wildfire, the infrastructure cost as well. So I would counter that notion that it's the plaintiff's lawyers that end up profiting off of a fund like this. It's the members of our community who are tragically impacted by wildfires who get the benefit of that. We're really early in any investigation. Whenever there is a catastrophic wildfire, our firm is always proactively looking to identify who may be responsible and to investigate the cause and origin of that wildfire. In this particular case, with respect to the Fairview fire or the Old Trails fire or the Auburn fire, we're not at a point where we have enough information one way or the other. But we will continue to look into the cause and origin of those fires. And when they are railroad caused or utility caused wildfires, those are instances where when a utility, when a big company, when a railroad does ignite a wildfire and it devastates a community, those are cases where we want to be proactive on behalf of the survivors of those wildfires and try to help make them whole and to bring them back as close as we can to where they were. We obviously can't bring back their lives and make it exactly as it was, but it's also important to hold big corporations accountable.
So now here's the connection with former Governor Jay Inslee, because Singleton Schreiber enlisted Inslee and Mike Webb, who was a longtime advisor to now Governor Bob Ferguson, to help move that legislation I referenced. Again, it didn't move past its initial public hearing. But in a September 17th, 2025 opinion piece, we had some comments here from Governor Inslee, and we'll put this up. It was posted in the Spokesman Review. He said, a wildfire victims fund is a practical, multi-benefit solution. It ensures economic justice for victims, increases prevention efforts and utility accountability, protects utilities against bankruptcy, and improves access to affordable wildfire insurance, all without pulling from the state general fund. So again, while it may not pull from the state general fund, in the case of California, ratepayers were bilked for more than $10 billion to pay into that fund. So then the law firm could come and get that and dole it out to wildfire victims. So I spoke this morning with GOP Chairman Jim Walsh about the Inslee connection to this law firm. And, when there's big fires in Spokane, this firm says we need a dedicated fund to drain from. Well, Chairman Walsh had some very pointed comments for former Governor Inslee about that.
Jay Inslee is a grifter. He is a shady, ambulance-chasing scumbag. And this is what he was before he got in politics. He was an ambulance-chasing lawyer then, out of politics now, and he keeps trying to make it sound like he is going to run for president or become a cabinet official. He's not. He's out of politics. He's reverted to his sleazy ambulance-chasing ways from years ago before he was in politics. Inslee has aligned himself with a California-based law firm that runs a grifty racket. This is what they do. They're very politically engaged with the left wing, with progressive politicians. And they get states to create a taxpayer-funded account with a new tax in these states that is a so-called wildfire victims fund. And it sounds sympathetic. It sounds like something people want to help, especially like right now in the wake of these fires really wrecking a lot of residential areas in and around Spokane County. People want to help. I mean, they want to, what can I do? I literally get calls from people and emails. What can I do? I want to help. Who could I give some money to? What can I do to volunteer? So people want to help. And these ghouls, these legal vampires take advantage of that impulse to help. And they set up these taxes that fund these victims funds, as they call them. And then they, the law firm that helped create the fund, the government money pile, then sues the state or sues NGOs and quasi-government agencies or local governments, the county, the fire district, whatever, to get at the money in the account that they helped set up. It is a complete grift. I mean, it's like a Ponzi scheme. It's like Bernie Madoff or Carlo Ponzi. It's a grift. And Inslee is up to his sleazy ears in trying to set up this kind of scam here in Washington State.
Again, important to note at this point, there is no evidence that utilities in Spokane, Avista, or any others were negligent. In fact, I know that notices were going out to cut power in certain areas. We do have an alleged arsonist in custody. And if, in fact, that fire sparked the others, there's not going to be any evidence at this point that the utilities were to blame. And then we have, of course, had incredible winds that day all across the state of Washington. So I would encourage you to check out my colleague Tim Clauser's article, the Center Square Washington page. He has the very latest on the fire victims, the numbers, and as well as important links for folks who are looking to help. All right. It is again August the 4th, and it's primary election day then in the state of Washington, and the day when voters here are narrowing down fields of candidates for local, state, and federal contests ahead of the November election. We have that top two primary. You're probably familiar with that by now. Doesn't matter your party affiliation, the top two vote getters will advance. The rest are out until next time. And all Washington House seats are up, 98 House seats, and then 24 of our Senate seats are up. So there's a lot on the ballot. And there are open seats as well where incumbents are not seeking re-election. A couple of other interesting contests we've been covering where incumbents are being challenged by those in their own party. So Republican Party Chair Jim Walsh of Aberdeen, again, in an interview this morning, told me he's a little discouraged to see turnout as low as it is thus far, but based on what he saw 4 years ago, which is the fairest comparison for what turnout will be, he thinks ultimately turnout's probably going to be okay, maybe even slightly up from where it was in 2022.
Sure. I mean, and I sympathize with those who want to vote on election day. For a long time, that was how I did it. I always felt election day is election day. We ought to vote on election day. Lately, having been in the sausage factory for a while, I've begun to see the importance of getting your ballot in earlier, at least a few days earlier. But I understand. I sympathize with those who want to vote on election day. I get it. What we tend to see with very late ballots is they amplify how a district trends anyway. So red districts tend to get a little redder with the late ballots, and blue districts tend to get a little bluer with the late ballots. So that's the phenomenon we've seen for a long time. The other phenomenon we've seen for a long time is the overall decline in voter participation. One of the reasons that Washington embraced 100% vote by mail was to increase voter turnout. And that has not happened. In the 20 odd years since we've started doing 100% vote by mail, we've seen a steady decline in voter participation. And that's not on one side or the other. That's not one party or the other. That's across the board. Voter participation is declining in Washington State, and we have to fight that. Now, traditionally, the I-5 corridor has higher voter turnout than other parts of the state. And that has given the edge to some of the more progressive candidates that have come forward in Washington State, because the more progressive precincts have higher voter turnout. And so, as someone who is on the other side of the spectrum politically from that, I'm doing everything I can to remind people in the districts away from the I-5 corridor that they do have a voice. If we could get our voter turnout numbers up outside of the corridor, we would restore more balance politically to the Washington state government, local governments, and our federal delegation.
So overall, in the August 2022 primary, we had 40.43% of Washington voters who took part. So just more than 4 out of 10 registered voters who took part. So little discouraging that voter turnout isn't better, but it is summer. Our primary in early August. Walsh and even others on the left are not necessarily fans of kind of bad timing. People are out of town, not paying attention, not in their regular routines for news consumption. And so maybe that ballot's just been sitting there on the counter for a couple of weeks and won't get turned in. The Republican National Committee, though, paying close attention to a race that we're going to be covering tonight. We're going to have some late night coverage for the Center Square primary results. One of those is in District 3. That is where Congresswoman Marie Gluesenkamp Perez is, according to the Republican National Committee, potentially vulnerable. And we have Senate Minority Leader John Braun of Centralia as the challenger. Both of them likely to move on, but the results of how that kind of shakes out tonight for primary numbers could be very telling for how things will fare in November and whether or not Republicans can get that seat back. It's a purple district. They're hoping to get it back. It's, again, as I mentioned, one of the ones that the RNC has paid attention to. So we are following closely for you this evening. And another one to watch is Central Washington's 4th congressional district, and I'll be covering that tonight as well. That's the one where Representative Dan Newhouse is stepping aside, and that opened up the floodgates to 11 different hopefuls in that contest. So, again, as of late last night, that's the latest numbers we have from the Secretary of State, just under 20% of ballots had been returned statewide. Election officials recommend if you are just today getting your ballot turned in, you should make sure to take that to a ballot drop box. I put up an article that is on our Center Square Washington page today that has a direct link to where all of those are. So no matter where you live, you can just get on there and, plug in your community, your zip code. It'll tell you the closest drop box to you. Otherwise, if you know where your county elections office is, or if there's a voting center in your community, those are open as well until 8 o'clock this evening. So it's advised just to make sure it counts at this point to, get it in that way just to be certain. And the first results on Tuesday night are coming in just after 8 o'clock. We'll be reporting on those. And Secretary of State has to have all of the results certified by August the 21st. So that's a wrap on today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily for this Tuesday, primary election day in the state of Washington. Get your ballots in if you can. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again tomorrow.